And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is February 27th, the 58th day of the year. Just 307 days remain to the year's over with. We'll start a new one. Holidays and observances. National Pokemon Day. Epic adventures with adorable creatures as you explore vibrant worlds. No-brainer day. Breathe deeply and focus on the present. Practices regularly can help reduce stress. National Strawberry Day. And Skip the Straw Day. Khachapuri Day. World NGO Day. In a world of problems, NGOs bring hope from poverty to environmental disasters, and they're true superheroes of our society. That's non-governmental organizations, don't you know? International Polar Bear Day, symbol of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. These Arctic creatures have a thick white coat and can swim long distances. Work Your Proper Hours Day. Retro Day. The Big Breakfast Day. National Kahlua Day, with its rich velvety flavor. This coffee liquor makes for a versatile addition to cocktails and desserts and nights you spend in. National Protein Day. Anosmia Awareness Day. Dominican Republic Independence Day. Adelaide Fringe. Make Mine Chocolate. Future Farmers of America Week. National Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Bird Health Awareness Week. National Engineers Week. National Invasive Species Awareness Week. National Justice for Animals Week. National Green Week. Martes Mundi. Chingay Parade. For those that are not familiar with that. If I can get, there we go. It's celebrated in Singapore. Showcases a vibrant tapestry of cultures from around the world. It's an annual event and a spectacle of stunning performances, flawless floats, and elaborate costumes. They truly reflect the rich diversity of the nation's communities. And somebody who had been to one of them, I don't remember what year they went, but it said it was absolutely unbelievable. Cornish Pastry Week, and of course, Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, where they fast from sunrise to sunset, focus on spiritual reflection and community. Famous people born on this date: Elizabeth Taylor, National Velvet, Kate Mara, John Steinbeck. And on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. House Republicans revolt against the president's tariffs despite the presidential warning. Trump pushes Congress to pass the SAVE Act during the State of the Union. No meddling with tariffs. The speeches, State of the Union, were all about aspirations. Doesn't matter if you're Reagan or Clinton or Obama or the Bush tandem or even President Trump. Aspirations are the quintessence of State of the Union speeches. What presidents aspire to do and what a president wants Congress to do. And all this flows toward the ultimate political aspirations: winning elections. Be it the next presidential election or the House or Senate elections in the midterms. And there are two big asks and one admonition from President Trump this week. He wants Congress to approve the SAVE Act, requiring proof of citizenship for people to vote. He wants lawmakers to pass a stock trading ban, handcuffing Congress from dealing in stock. Do away with insider trading, which has made several members of Congress multimillionaires. And the president doesn't want Congress to meddle in tariff policy. He touted his new tariffs, arguing that they'll eventually replace the nation's income tax. You know, the income tax was passed during World War II as a temporary tax to fund the war. But when have you seen government walk away from a pot of money that they can dip into anytime they want to? Well, that's what income tax became. Well, a report has exposed billions in unrecovered fraud, waste, and Watchdog Coalition as a Watchdog Coalition offers support to Trump's crackdown. As the Trump administration appoints Vice President Vance to lead a nationwide war on fraud, a coalition of conservative state financial officers said it's already uncovered and stopped billions in taxpayer waste and is pledging to partner with the White House to root out corruption nationwide. In a letter Thursday to the White House, the State Finance Officers Foundation praised President Trump's focus on what he called fraud scandals that have resulted in tens of billions of dollars being stolen from the American taxpayer, writing that such corruption shreds the fabric of a nation. The CEO, O.J. Aleka, told Vance that the group's 40 conservative state treasurers, auditors, and controllers across 28 states stand ready to support the administration's anti-fraud mission, noting they collectively oversee more than $8 trillion in state funds. The letter accompanied the inaugural 2025 oversight report, which claims that affiliated state financial officers safeguarded more than $28 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse in 2025 alone. It's interesting. I went to the VA OIG, Office of Inspector General, with fraud, waste, and abuse that I had discovered. They didn't have time to talk to me. More important, they go on the photo ops and vacations and all the other things that high elected officials like to do. Well, Bill Clinton faces high-stakes house grilling in the Epstein probe after Hillary blasted what she called fishing expeditions. Yes, Hillary Clinton is not somebody who likes to be questioned. Anything she does is anointed by God. Former President Clinton testified to the House Oversight Committee in a high-stakes deposition for the committee's probing of Jeffrey Epstein on Friday. Closed-door meeting is expected to take place at 11 a.m. on the Chappaqua Performing Arts Center in Westchester County, New York. Chappaqua has been the Clintons' primary residence since they left the White House at the end of the former president's tenure. Yes, they didn't want to go back to Arkansas. Might actually have to sweat in the heat. Republicans have been eager to question Clinton about his ties to Epstein for months as the committee has gone back and forth with his lawyers about the terms of the interview. Both Democrats and Republicans are expected to grill Clinton as well as committee staff on both sides. And his sit-down comes a day after his wife, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, appeared before the panel for her own lengthy deposition on the Epstein probe. However, House Oversight Chairman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, told reporters Thursday that he anticipated Bill Clinton's deposition to be even longer than his wife's. He also stressed Thursday that neither of the Clintons are being accused of wrongdoing tied to Epstein. At least not yet. We'll see what comes out of his deposition. Well, the Wire actor Bobby J. Brown has died in a tragic barn fire accident at the age of 62. The Brown's talent agent, Dr. Albert Bramonte, shared a statement following his client's sudden passing. He said he was a uniquely talented actor and a man of great character. From his deep roots as a Golden Gloves champion to his impactful performances on screen, he brought an unmistakable authenticity to everything he did, according to the statement. He was a dedicated professional and a true joy to represent. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family and loved ones during this incredibly difficult time. The press release obtained by Fox News stated that the firefighters reported a barn fire with entrapment just after 10 p.m. on Friday the 26th. February 26th. Can't read my own handwriting. Firefighters arrived to find a 50 by 100-foot barn nearly fully engulfed in fire. Family members on scene confirmed that one individual was still inside the structure. After the fire was brought under control, firefighters located a deceased male victim inside the barn. That's according to St. Mary's County press release. Press release stated the individual was attempting to jumpstart a vehicle in the barn. St. Mary's County stated the victim contacted his wife, requested a fire extinguisher, and by the time she got outside the barn, the fire had engulfed the structure. Victim's wife suffered burns to her hands and was transferred to the hospital. Press release didn't list Brown by name, but that's actually who it turned out to be. Well, Pakistan has declared open war on Afghanistan in response to the Taliban's retaliatory strikes. Pakistan's defense minister declared an open war with Afghanistan on Friday after the two sides exchanged heavy fire along their shared border on Thursday. That's according to multiple reports. Defense Minister Khawaja Mohammed Asif said in a post on X that Pakistan had hoped the Taliban would bring stability after NATO's withdrawal, but instead accused the group of turning Afghanistan into a colony of India and exporting terrorism. He said, our patience has run out. Now it's open war between us. Well, the clashes came after the Taliban said it launched retaliatory strikes on Pakistan's military positions, while Islamabad said it was responding to unprovoked fire in the area. Looks like the whole world's descending into open warfare. Well, a Newsom staffer who told California Reporter to F off is raking in massive taxpayer-funded salary. Izzy Garden, that's Gardon, longtime Gavin Newsom staffer, made headlines earlier this week for telling a national reporter to F off after she pressed him on the California governor's reported dyslexia diagnosis, is raking in a hefty six-figure salary, according to Fox News digital report. While Newsom's dyslexia diagnosis has been public for decades, interest in the matter was amplified amid the California governor's book tour he launched this month. During one of his first stops on the tour in Atlanta, he was asked about his dyslexia in conversation with Democratic Mayor of Atlanta, Andre Dickens. They asked what he hoped readers would take away from the discussion about his diagnosis in the governor's new book. He said, I'm like you. I'm no better than you. Yeah, that's a change in attitude. You know, I'm a 960 SAT guy, he said in response. Garnering criticism while he was pandering to the black community. Amid the rebukes from the MAGA world and the Republicans and Real Clear Politics national correspondent Susan Crabtree reached out to Garden for verification of his childhood disability diagnosis. In response, Garden told her to respectfully F off. Yes, that's the way to treat the news media. Well, federal judge, one of God's anointed, allows Trump's $400 million White House ballroom to move forward. Federal judge denied an injunction against the $400 million White House expansion project funded entirely by private donors. He denied a legal challenge to President Trump's White House ballroom project, clearing the way for construction on the estimated $400 million expansion to proceed. U.S. District Judge Richard Leon denied the injunction sought by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, saying the group was unlikely to succeed on the merits. The group sued the Trump administration in December to halt construction, arguing it skipped required reviews and failed to obtain congressional approval before demolishing the east wing of the White House. In his order, Leon wrote that the preservation group relied on a ragtag group of theories under the Administrative Procedures Act and the Constitution. He said the challenge failed because the White House office in question is not an agency under the APA, and because the plaintiff didn't believe what was needed to challenge the president's authority to complete the project with private funds without congressional approval. Now, basically, this is just another attempt to take the position that whatever Trump wants is wrong. Well, child predator cleared for parole was arrested after a surprise warrant drops hours before the prison release. David Allen Funston, 64 years old. He was a convicted California child molester. He was set to walk free this week, but instead turned over to law enforcement after a new arrest warrant was issued in Placer County, according to state officials. California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation said at approximately 7:30 a.m., David Allen Funston, 64, was transferred to law enforcement authorities from Placer County after they filed a new criminal charges and issued a warrant for his arrest. Funston had been granted parole Tuesday and was scheduled for release later this week. The Department of Corrections said Funston was sentenced in 1999 to life to possibility parole in connection with sexual abuse of children, including kidnapping and lewd and lascivious acts with a child under 14 years old. He was accused of kidnapping and molesting a child in Roseville in 1996, according to Placer County. He was convicted in 1999 of kidnapping and child molestation involving multiple victims. Recently sentenced to 3 life terms in prison, but under California's elderly parole program, was granted parole suitability and scheduled for release from custody. Placer County District Attorney's Office said it refiled charges against Funston stemming from the 1996 case within the state's statute of limitations. He was found suitable for parole at a hearing before the Board of Parole hearings on September 24, 2025. But on January 9th, 2026, Governor Newsom referred the case back to the Board of Parole hearings that were in an en banc review, which a majority of appointed commissioners reconsidered the prior parole decision. February 18th, 2026, the board reaffirmed its recommendation he would receive parole. See, in California, you really can't do anything wrong. I mean, it took a while before California decided it was illegal to kill your wife. Look at the OJ case. Well, FBI raid involving LA school superintendent is possibly tied to a failed $6 million AI deal and a potential conflict. Federal investigation into the Los Angeles Unified School District superintendent, whose home and school office were raided Wednesday, may be tied to a failed multi-million-dollar AI school contract involving a potential conflict of interest. Alberto Carvalho recently awarded a $6 million contract, paying $3 million up front to education technology company All Here. Former salesperson employed by the firm also had her Miami property raided the same day as Carvalho, according to public records cited by the Los Angeles Times. The woman, whose name was Deborah Kerr, reportedly had close ties to Carvalho during his tenure leading the Miami-Dade Public School, County Public School. Spokesperson Jim Marshall confirmed to local media, Miami Herald, that they searched the resident and Southwest ranches today as part of the matter and since cleared the scene. 2023, Carvalho secured a contract with All Here to develop a AI chatbot called Ed, designed to help address student issues such as absenteeism. Yes, we really need a computer model to tell us when somebody is absent. Anything to spend taxpayer funds. Well, it's turned out that a Ring camera spotted vehicles leaving Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. Supposedly, a woman was seen hanging out of one of them screaming for help. Well, the alleged criminal history of the missing mother of 3, who was found after 24 years, that criminal history has caught up with her. North Carolina woman whose disappearance in 2001 triggered her 24-year search is now facing criminal charges from the year she vanished. Michelle Hunley Smith, now 63, is located February 20th at an undisclosed location in North Carolina after detectives received new information about her case. That's according to the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office. She was 38 when her husband reported she left her Eden home December 9, 2001 to go Christmas shopping in Martinsville, Virginia, and never came back. Her vehicle was never found. An extensive investigation followed, and despite years of investigative work, her whereabouts remain unknown till last week. Authorities said Smith told investigators she left of her own accord and referenced domestic issues. Sheriff Sam Page told Fox News Digital the sheriff's office had no prior record of domestic incidents at the home. No criminal charges expected in her disappearance, but following her identification, investigators discovered an outstanding order for arrest dating back to 2001. So now she's finally going to face belated music. Sarah Ferguson, the former Duchess of York, could face police questioning as a key witness if she returns to the UK after Andrew's arrest. She's the Duchess of York, now facing renewed scrutiny after the arrest of her ex-husband, former Prince Andrew. The former prince, now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, 66 years old, was arrested February 19th on suspicion of misconduct in public office as part of an inquiry linked to his ties with the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. You know, we did an investigative book into Epstein. We're going to be talking about that one day next week. He was released after 11 hours in custody, hadn't been charged and denied any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, the 66-year-old Duchess of York has kept a low profile in recent months, and her current whereabouts are unknown. UK's Daily Mail reported Ferguson's last seen leaving Royal Lodge, Andrew's former 30-room mansion, in September. Now they divorced in 1996. They've continued living on the property together. According to People magazine, the Duchess reportedly planned to spend a few months overseas. Leading royal watchers speculate about what could await her upon her return to Britain. While Ferguson has not been accused of any wrongdoing and no arrest warrants been issued, legal and royal experts told Fox News her homecoming could still draw fresh attention to her own past ties to Epstein. It raises new questions about whether authorities may seek her cooperation as a witness. Yes, even dead, Epstein is causing no end of trouble and travail for folks he knew. According to Jesse Waters, the Epstein saga is actually going global. And there's a report was found that had been prepared by the DOJ shortly after Epstein's supposed suicide that said his death was actually a murder. That's one of the many things we're going to be talking about when we start investigating that one. Well, The Chosen fans reveal why the Jesus series is rewriting Hollywood rules. Fans of the hit biblical drama The Chosen will have to wait till the fall for this highly anticipated sixth season. But thousands of the show's most devoted followers don't let that stop them from celebrating. Last week in Charlotte, North Carolina, Chosen Con brought together a massive community to meet the cast and crew for the third fan convention. As for the first ever multi-season TV show based on the life of Jesus and his disciples, the series has amassed over 250 million viewers since its 2019 debut and has been translated into 125 languages. Originally a crowd-funded project, all 5 seasons are now streaming on Amazon Prime and available for free to view on the Chosen app. The Savannah Guthrie's $1 million reward mirrors past kidnapping cases solved by cash. Several high-profile kidnapping cases have been solved with a hefty reward being offered. Savannah Guthrie announces a $1 million reward for the recovery of her mother, Nancy Guthrie. In a Instagram video on Tuesday morning, Savannah Guthrie announced a family reward of up to $1 million for the recovery of Nancy, her mother. Family is also making a $500,000 donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, she said. And there's been a number of high-profile cases that have been solved with high rewards. Frank Sinatra Jr. was one. John Paul Getty III. His grandfather, one of the wealthiest men in the world, refused to initially pay a ransom. Cost his grandson his ear. Well, Vance says there's no chance the U.S. is going to get into prolonged Middle East war amid the Iran tension. President Trump pressures Iran to abandon its nuclear ambitions, and amid rising tensions, Vice President Vance told the Washington Post there's no chance we're going to get into a years-long war in the Middle East. He said the idea we're going to be in the Middle East war for years with no end in sight, there's no chance that's going to happen, he said Thursday. I think we'll all prefer the diplomatic option, he said, according to the Post, but it really depends on what the Iranians doing what they say. Well, Ayatollah is discovering that his word is not law for most of the world. And Sweden has jammed suspected Russian drone near a French carrier as NATO war fears rise. Swedish armed forces jammed a suspected Russian drone February 25th as it approached a French nuclear-powered aircraft carrier while docked in Malmo during a major NATO drills, according to reports. The Charles de Gaulle warship, the flagship of the French Navy, was visiting the southern Swedish port as part of the mission Lafayette 26. Drills brought NATO naval forces in the Baltic Sea region at a time with rising tensions with Moscow. We could wind up with another world war. Well, on that note, that ends our history segment. We're going to talk about our topic for today, which is the first in our new series, The Suppression Files. It's the Oklahoma City bombing, evidence that was ignored. April 19th, 1995 at 9:02 in the morning, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City ceased to exist as it had moments before. In less than 10 seconds, a truck bomb tore away the north face of the structure, killing 168 people, including 19 children. It was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. And the horror was immediate and undeniable. The grief was national. The outrage was universal. Within days, federal authorities announced that the primary perpetrator had been identified, Timothy James McVeigh. Within weeks, an official narrative had taken shape. Within years, the case concluded McVeigh's conviction and execution. When a case is solved almost immediately, that alone is highly suspicious, in my humble opinion. But for many Americans, the story ended right there with his execution. But history is rarely that simple. The purpose of our work is not to challenge the tragedy and diminish the suffering or absolve those found guilty. The evidence presented at trial established Timothy McVeigh's role in constructing and detonating the bomb. That record stands. What we'd talk about is something narrow and at the same time broader. What did investigators initially pursue that later disappeared from public discussion? What leads were explored and which ones were quietly abandoned? Why did certain early witness accounts conflict with later conclusions? And what role, if any, did confidential informants or malicious surveillance operations play in the broader context of the case? Now, these aren't accusations, not by any means. They're documented questions raised by journalists, defense attorneys, in some cases, members of Congress. Nearly 3 decades later, thousands of pages of records remain sealed. Investigative threads remain contested. Debates over John Doe number 2 persist. Former agents and researchers still disagree over the completeness of the official account. Revisiting Oklahoma City is not about reopening wounds. It's about understanding how major national cases are built, whether the public record always reflects the full investigative landscape. In the suppressed files, we follow a simple framework. What does the record show? And what did the record miss? Oklahoma City bombing deserves careful, sober re-examination, not to inflame, but to actually clarify. History demands scrutiny. Closure does not equal comprehension. Now, the date was April 19th, 1995. The location was Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. It was 9:02 on a clear, cool morning. Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building stood 8 stories tall in downtown Oklahoma City, occupying a full city block bordered by Northwest 9th Street. Inside were the offices of the Social Security Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the Secret Service, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and other federal agencies. On the second floor, America's Kid Daycare Center had begun its morning routine. Parents signed children in, federal employees passed through security, clerks answered phones. Veterans arrived for appointments. Just an ordinary Wednesday. At about 8:57 in the morning, a yellow Ryder rental truck entered the downtown area and proceeded along Northwest 5th Street. The witnesses later recall seeing the truck pull into a curbside parking space directly in front of the Murrah Building's north facade. Nothing about that vehicle appeared extraordinary. The driver remained sitting inside for a moment. At 9:02 in the morning, a massive explosion tore through downtown Oklahoma City. The blast sheared away the entire north face of the building. Concrete columns snapped, floors collapsed onto one another. Windows shattered across a 16-block radius. Vehicles are heard through the air. A shockwave rippled outward, registering a measurable seismic event. Sound was described by survivors as thunderous, a concussive force that felt like the sky collapsing. Inside the building, chaos was instantaneous. Walls disintegrated, ceilings caved in, offices are crushed under tons of falling concrete. Daycare centers suffered catastrophic destruction. Outside, stunned witnesses emerged into clouds of dust and debris. Smoke drifted into the sky, car alarms screamed, sirens began to wail. Initial speculation ranged from a gas explosion to a construction accident. Within minutes, first responders began arriving. Police officers and firefighters confronted a scene unlike any they'd encountered before. Building structural integrity was uncertain. Gas leaks were reported. Fires smoldered beneath the rubble. Survivors called out from beneath collapsed floors. And rescue operations began almost immediately. Over the following days, more than 800 people be treated for injuries. Ultimately, 168 lost their lives. The building was quickly declared intentional, the bombing, rather. What had begun as an ordinary morning became a defining moment in modern American history. At 9:03 a.m., 1 minute after the explosion, Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger was patrolling Interstate 35 near Perry, Oklahoma. He saw a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis traveling northbound without a visible license plate. And the absence of a plate provided lawful cause for a traffic stop. So he pulled the vehicle over. The driver identified himself as Timothy James McVeigh. During the interaction, Hanger noticed a concealed weapon under McVeigh's jacket, a Glock 45 caliber handgun. McVeigh did not possess a permit to carry the weapon, so he was arrested on the spot for carrying a concealed firearm. And at that moment, neither Hanger nor McVeigh mentioned the explosion in Oklahoma City. McVeigh was transported to the Noble County Jail. As news of the bombing spread nationwide, federal investigators began uncovering fragments of the Ryder truck used in the attack. And among the debris was a rear axle assembly containing a vehicle identification number. And that VIN was traced to a Ryder rental facility in Junction City, Kansas. Rental records led investigators to a man who used the alias Robert Kling, but whose physical description matched the individual now in custody in Noble County. Now, this is all quite convenient. As soon as the bomb goes off, they catch a man driving down the interstate who, surprise, surprise, turns out to match the description of somebody who rented a truck who may or may not have been at the bombing site. April 21st, 1995, McVeigh was formally charged in connection with the bombing. And the speed with which investigators identified the primary suspect was remarkable. Within 48 hours, federal authorities had a suspect in custody, a rental record trail, and forensic evidence linking the truck to the crime scene. But early witness accounts included descriptions of another individual seen with McVeigh at the rental agency. Investigators initially issued a composite sketch of a second suspect that they labeled John Doe number 2. And the manhunt began. In days that followed, thousands of tips poured in. And then as the case solidified, official statements shifted. Authorities announced that John Doe number 2 likely didn't exist. They attributed the early sightings to mistaken identity. And the search ended quietly. Many observers, that should have closed the matter. Others, it marked the beginning of a lingering question. Within the weeks of the bombing, the Federal Bureau of Investigation launched what was then the largest criminal investigation in its history. This case involved more than 28,000 interviews, thousands of forensic examinations, and over 3.5 tons of physical evidence. Investigators determined that the bomb consisted primarily of ammonium nitrate fertilizer mixed with fuel oil, commonly referred to as ANFO, or ANFO, combined with other materials to increase explosive force. Evidence linked McVeigh to the purchase of large quantities of ammonium nitrate from a Kansas farm supply store. Further investigation led to Terry Nichols, a longtime associate of McVeigh. Nichols was arrested and later charged as a co-conspirator. Another associate, Michael Fortier, admitted prior knowledge of the plot and served prison time for failing to warn authorities. And the government's theory in the case was quite clear at this point. Timothy McVeigh, motivated by anti-government ideology and anger over a 1993 Waco siege, constructed a truck bomb with assistance from Nichols and detonated it outside the Murrah building on April 19, 1995. The attack date, April 19th, coincided with the second anniversary of the conclusion of the Branch Davidian standoff in Waco, Texas. During trial proceedings, prosecutors presented rental records and fertilizer purchase documentation, forensic bomb component analysis, testimony from Fortier, and physical evidence tying McVeigh to the truck. 1995, McVeigh was convicted on 11 federal counts, including conspiracy and use of a weapon of mass destruction. He was sentenced to death. Terry Nichols got life imprisonment without parole. Michael Fortier got a 12-year sentence. June 11, 2001, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. As far as the federal government was concerned, the case was over at this point. But even during the trial, defense attorneys raised questions about investigative transparency, withheld documents, and the scope of additional suspects. In subsequent years, the release of certain FBI materials, including previously undisclosed documents, reignited debate about whether all investigative avenues have been fully pursued. Now, we're not disputing the conviction. We're examining the margins of the case, the threads that were never introduced, that were introduced but then withdrawn. Because in major national investigations, what's excluded from the final narrative can be as revealing as what it entails. Now, Timothy James McVeigh was born April 23, 1968 in Lockport, New York. In most outward measures, his early life was unremarkable. Grew up in a working-class family. Friends later described him as intelligent, quiet, and socially reserved. Developed an early interest in firearms and survivalist literature. During his teenage years, he spent time at local gun ranges and became fascinated with military culture. He graduated from high school in 1986. He worked at a series of short-term jobs before he enlisted in the United States Army in 1988. McVeigh served as a Bradley fighting vehicle gunner during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. By official accounts, he performed well. He was awarded the Bronze Star Medal and was considered a disciplined soldier. Following the war, McVeigh applied for Special Forces training but didn't complete the selection process. The experience appears to have been pivotal. Some acquaintances later stated McVeigh left the military feeling disillusioned, both with his career prospects and with what he perceived as expanding federal authority at home. After his discharge in late 1991, he drifted into the emerging American militia movement. Throughout the early 1990s, he traveled extensively, frequenting gun shows across the Midwest. He sold military surplus items, bumper stickers, and anti-government literature. He became increasingly vocal about his belief the federal government was encroaching on constitutional freedoms. In the materials he circulated were copies of the book The Turner Diaries, a 1978 novel by William Luther Pierce that depicts a violent uprising against the U.S. government, including a fictional truck bombing of a federal building. The book later be cited during McVeigh's trial as ideological inspiration for the bombing. Two events in the early 1990s profoundly influenced McVeigh's worldview. The first was the 1992 standoff at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and the second was the 1993 siege of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. Ruby Ridge confrontation resulted in the deaths of a federal agent and two members of the Weaver family. The Waco siege ended April 19, 1993, when a fire engulfed the Branch Davidian compound after a 51-day standoff between federal agents and SEC members. 76 people died, including children. When McVeigh traveled to Waco during the siege, sold anti-government literature, and expressed outrage at what he viewed as excessive federal force. April 19th will later be chosen as the date of the Oklahoma City bombing, the second anniversary of the Waco fire. In the years that followed Waco, McVeigh's rhetoric sharpened. He expressed belief in federal overreach, illegitimate authority, and a need for resistance. Associates described him as increasingly rigid in his views. He maintained contact with individuals in militia circles, including acquaintances connected to communities such as Elohim City in Oklahoma. And it's important to note the government's case established McVeigh acted primarily with Terry Nichols in planning and executing the bombing. No formal charges were actually brought against broader militia organizations. But McVeigh's ideological formation did not occur in isolation. Early 1990 saw a surge in anti-government activism, particularly in rural areas in the Midwest. Oklahoma City bombing emerged from that atmosphere. According to trial testimony, McVeigh and Nichols began acquiring bomb-making materials in 1994. Ammonium nitrate fertilizer was purchased under Nichols' name. Fuel oil and other components were gathered. Storage lockers were rented. April 17, 1995, McVeigh rented a Ryder truck in Junction City, Kansas, using the alias Robert Kling. 2 days later, that truck exploded outside the Murrah building. Prosecution argued that the bombing was intended as a symbolic strike against federal authority. McVeigh himself later described the attack as retaliation. The jury found the evidence supported premeditated conspiracy. The record shows planning and preparation and execution. But even as the prosecution's case solidified, early investigative reports suggested McVeigh may not have been entirely alone in the days leading up to April 19th. And that question, initially pursued aggressively, would soon become one of the most debated elements of the investigation. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, investigators moved quickly to identify the individual who had rented the Ryder truck. Employees at the Junction City rental facility described the renter as a white male in his mid-20s, but several witnesses reported seeing a second man with him. Based on early witness interviews, the FBI released a composite drawing of a man identified as John Doe No. 2. The sketch was circulated nationwide. Media outlets published the image prominently. Federal authorities stated that this second individual is believed to be a possible accomplice, and the manhunt began almost immediately. Tips flooded into investigative offices. Sightings were reported across multiple states. For several days, the search appeared active and urgent, and then the narrative shifted. As the investigation progressed, officials announced that John Doe No. 2 likely resulted from mistaken identity. One theory held that witnesses may have confused another individual present at the rental facility with McVeigh himself, of the suggested memory distortion in the chaotic post-attack environment. Eventually, federal authorities stated it no longer believed a second suspect was involved in renting the truck. The search was discontinued. No arrest was made. No further composite updates were issued. Despite official reassurances, certain early reports complicate the picture. Some witnesses maintained their recollections, though. Others stated the second man appeared distinct from McVeigh. Defense attorneys later argued that investigative records related to alternative suspects were incomplete or not fully disclosed. Years later, the release of certain FBI documents, including materials inadvertently withheld prior to McVeigh's execution, renewed debate over whether every investigative avenue had been exhausted. It's essential to distinguish between two very important questions. Number one, was Timothy McVeigh responsible for the bombing? And number two, was every early investigative lead pursued to full conclusion? Well, the trial resolved the first question. He was found guilty. The second remains a subject of inquiry among researchers and journalists. At the time of the bombing, federal agencies were actively monitoring militia movements across several states. Confidential informants had been placed inside certain extremist groups. Some critics have asked, were any informants aware of plans prior to April 19th? Were intelligence signals missed? Were investigative decisions influenced by a desire to present a contained narrative? Now, these questions don't constitute proof of a broader conspiracy, but they do reflect the complexity of large-scale investigations conducted under immense public pressure. And what the record shows is quite clear. McVeigh was convicted. Nichols was convicted. Fortier admitted prior knowledge. What the record leaves less clear is how thoroughly alternative possibilities were examined before being dismissed. In major national cases, early confusion is common, but clarity achieved quickly can sometimes obscure the investigative path taken to get there. The story of John Doe number 2 illustrates how early threads may fade, not necessarily because they're sinister, but because investigative priorities shift. Whether that shift was justified remains a matter of interpretation. In the days after the bombing, federal investigators widened their lens beyond Oklahoma City. One location that drew early attention, of course, was Elohim City, a secluded religious compound in eastern Oklahoma near the Arkansas border. At the time, Elohim City was known within law enforcement circles as a refuge for white supremacist separatists and individuals associated with extremist ideology. Residents had overlapping ties to militia networks active in the Midwest during the early 1990s. Timothy McVeigh had made phone calls to Elohim City in the months prior to the bombing. That fact was documented. Phone records do show contact. Of course, the significance of these calls remains debated. What complicates the Elohim City thread is that federal authorities had confidential informants embedded within extremist circles during this period. The early 1990s was marked by heightened monitoring of militia groups following Ruby Ridge and Waco. Intelligence gathering wasn't passive. It was active and ongoing. Critics later asked if informants were present within overlapping networks, what did they know? Were warnings missed? Were signals misinterpreted? Or were investigative threads deemed insignificant and just set aside? The official record maintains that no credible advanced warning of the bombing reached federal agencies. Investigative reporting in subsequent years raised questions about whether leads connected to Elohim City were fully pursued or quietly deprioritized once McVeigh and Nichols were in custody. The pattern began to emerge at this point, an expanding perimeter. Then it was contracted. When a case achieves narrative clarity early on, the incentive to complicate it diminishes. The government's case rested heavily on the construction of the bomb. According to prosecutors, the device consisted primarily of ammonium nitrate fertilizer compounded with fuel oil, enhanced with additional materials to increase detonation power. Expert testimony established that such a device, when properly constructed and detonated, could produce catastrophic structural damage, and it did. But forensic analysis in the aftermath of large-scale explosions is rarely simple. Some independent researchers later questioned whether ANFO alone accounted for the full scope of structural collapse observed at the Murrah building. These discussions centered on, number one, the blast pattern interpretation. Residue testing is number 2, and the speed of column failure is number 3. It's critical to state the federal court accepted the government's forensic explanation, and the jury found it convincing. However, some engineers and former military personnel publicly suggested the damage profile appeared unusually concentrated. Now, were these fringe claims or technical disagreements outside the courtroom? The larger issue is not whether alternative bomb theories were correct. It's whether forensic dissent was thoroughly evaluated or dismissed because the primary suspect had already been secured. Major cases can generate momentum. Momentum can actually narrow inquiry. Well, in 2001, just weeks before Timothy McVeigh's scheduled execution, the FBI disclosed that thousands of pages of investigative documents had not been provided to defense attorneys during trial preparation. And the Bureau characterized that omission as inadvertent. The documents reportedly contained interview notes and investigative material that had not been turned over during discovery. And as a result, McVeigh's execution was briefly delayed. An internal review followed. The execution ultimately proceeded. The official position remained unchanged, but that episode did have consequences. For critics, it reinforced the concern. If thousands of pages were overlooked in the largest domestic terrorism case in American history, what else might have escaped scrutiny? The documents didn't overturn the verdict, but they did expose administrative imperfection. The complex investigations, oversight is possible. In politically charged investigations, oversight can carry deeper implications. Was this a bureaucratic error or a symptom of institutional haste? Well, that answer depends upon your perspective. What remains uncontested is disclosure problems did occur, and disclosure problems in capital cases matter a great deal. In mid-1995, the United States demanded resolution. The bombing had shaken national confidence, and there was urgency, political, emotional, and institutional, to deliver clarity. Within 2 days of the bombing, McVeigh had been identified. Within weeks, the conspiracy was framed. Within months, the prosecution's theory solidified. Speed can reflect competence. It can also reflect pressure. High-profile federal investigations unfold under a great deal of scrutiny. Congressional oversight, media attention, public fear, political consequences. Under such conditions, investigative flexibility can narrow. Alternative leads become distractions, peripheral actors become noise. Ambiguity becomes intolerable. Well, the case against McVeigh was actually strong, but the environment in which it was built was not neutral. Now, we're not arguing that investigators acted maliciously. We are actually raising something more subtle. Once a narrative is viable and publicly defensible, institutional momentum favors confirmation over expansion. The questions about John Doe No. 2 faded. The Elohim City receded. Forensic disputes were compartmentalized. Disclosure failures were minimized. Closure was achieved. Whether completeness was achieved is now the question that lingers. In the aftermath of the bombing, the public focus was on rescue and prosecution and justice. But behind the scenes, oversight questions began to surface. Congress held hearings. Federal officials testified. The narrative presented to lawmakers was consistent. The bombing was just the work of Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, motivated by anti-government ideology and retaliation for Waco. The case was described as comprehensive, but hearings often illuminate as much through omission as through testimony. Throughout the early 1990s, federal agencies were actively monitoring militia movements across multiple states. Ruby Ridge and Waco had heightened federal sensitivity to extremist rhetoric. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and various joint terrorism task forces got into operation. Informants were deployed. Surveillance operations were active. The questions raised during oversight discussions were not whether McVeigh held extremist views. It was whether anybody inside monitored networks had heard anything beforehand. Officials testified that no actionable warning had been received. And that phrase, no actionable warning, became central to the question. It's precise, it's technical, it leaves room, because intelligence failures are rarely binary. They're rarely a matter of knew or didn't know. They're often matters of fragments, dismissed and deprioritized or lost in the noise. Now, were there fragments? Were there signals too weak to trigger alarms? Or were there none at all? Congress was assured the system had not failed in a preventable way, but the full depth of the intelligence gathering operations rarely disclosed publicly. Oversight depends on transparency, and transparency is often filtered. 2001 revelation that thousands of documents had not been turned over to the defense was described as an administrative error. The lawmakers and observers had reopened a broader question. If documentation can be overlooked in a capital case, how confident can the public be the full investigative picture was presented? The Bureau conducted internal reviews. Reforms were discussed. Procedural corrections were promised. The conviction stood. The execution proceeded. The confidence is not built solely on verdicts. It's built on the perception that every avenue was explored without prejudice. Politically sensitive cases, oversight can become symbolic. Hearings occur. Reports are issued. Statements are made. But rarely does oversight unwind the core narrative once it's established. By the late 1990s, the official account of Oklahoma City was institutionally solidified. The window for expanding the investigation had narrowed, not because evidence disappeared, but because conclusions had settled. Now, in the years that followed the bombing, Oklahoma City rebuilt. A memorial was constructed on the site of the Murrah building. Each of the 168 victims is commemorated with a symbolic chair. April 19th becomes a day of remembrance. For survivors and families, priority is not investigative nuance. It was healing. Healing often requires closure. The official narrative provided that closure. McVeigh was tried, Nichols was imprisoned, Fortier got his sentence. Justice as defined by the courts had been delivered. But public memory and investigative completeness are not always aligned. As years passed, raising questions about unresolved elements of the case became uncomfortable. To question was sometimes interpreted as disrespect. To re-examine was sometimes perceived as undermining grief. But historical scrutiny is not denied, it's examination. In high-impact national tragedies, memory becomes structured. Heroes are defined, villains are fixed, complexity is compressed. The bombing was framed correctly as an act of domestic terrorism carried out by extremists. But once that frame hardened, revisiting investigative inconsistencies felt unnecessary to many folks. Human desire for narrative stability is powerful, and institutions respond to that desire. No federal agency publicly conceded investigative failures in Oklahoma City. No formal finding declared the case incomplete. But over time, journalists and independent researchers continued to examine early witness statements, informant questions, and document discrepancies. Their persistence didn't overturn the verdict, but it did sustain the conversation. The tension at the heart of the case is not about guilt, it's about process. Was the investigation thorough? Was it merely sufficient? Was every inconvenient thread pulled, or were some allowed to fray because of complicated clarity? For the families of the victims, the legal conclusion was final. For historians and investigators, finality does not preclude analysis. Politics of memory often favors simplicity. History rarely does. Within hours of the bombing, federal investigators are already assembling what would become one of the most aggressive prosecutions in modern American history. The arrest of Timothy McVeigh on a traffic stop, pulled over for a missing license plate, quickly became the backbone of the official narrative. The lone extremist, inspired by our government ideology, acted with limited assistance. And the case unfolded in stages. The Ride rental truck traced to McVeigh, fertilizer purchases, storage locker evidence, witness statements placing him in Junction City, and the involvement of Terry Nichols. The prosecution framed the bombing as a revenge attack for Waco and Ruby Ridge. McVeigh himself reinforced that narrative with later interviews, presenting the bombing as a political warfare. But even as the federal case solidified, questions did linger. Were all explosive components recovered? Were all witnesses fully heard? Were all suspects fully pursued? Now, the official case itself was powerful, but not universally accepted. One of the big questions revolved around John Doe number 2, the phantom accomplice, as he was called. In the chaotic days after the bombing, witnesses reported seeing McVeigh with another man when renting the Ryder truck. Composite sketches were released. The unidentified man became known as John Doe number 2. And for weeks, federal authorities treated him as a real suspect, until they didn't. FBI later stated the witnesses were mistaken. The individual was either misidentified or did not exist. And the sketch quickly disappeared from public focus. But there were still questions that remained. Why were so many witnesses consistent? Why were early investigative bulletins urgent about locating him? And why did the narrative narrow so quickly? Was John Doe number 2 a case of mistaken memory and a national crisis? Or was he somebody who didn't fit the prosecutorial theory? Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We've run out of time. We'll be back on Monday and talk about Elohim City and a lot of unanswered leads. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great weekend.